Hi, my name is Shibbler, and I planned to get some recording done today, to record some music, but as you can see, it's very wet outside, and I usually record all of my music in my car. So if I was to carry all my recording equipment out to my car, there's a strong possibility that it would get wet and damaged, and I don't want to go through all that. I don't want to take the risk. So I can't get any of that done today, but I had another idea. I've got this itch to revisit the studio album discography of one of probably my favourite solo recording artist of all time, David Bowie. I've loved his music since I was I can remember, really. My mum tells me that she used to play me David Bowie, her favourite David Bowie records, when she was pregnant with me, headphones on the stomach style. About 4 years ago, I became completely obsessed with him and listened to most of his studio albums. But that phase passed, and I moved on to other artists, and I'd listened to so much David Bowie at that time that I never really felt the need to revisit much of his stuff, and I didn't. I haven't for years now. But I was hanging out with two friends yesterday, just writing some songs, and Bowie came up, and one of them mentioned that they'd never given Bowie the time and never listened to a David Bowie album in full, and me and my other friend just started geeking out and oh, you need to listen to this album, and don't listen to the 80s stuff, it's crap, but 90s stuff's really underrated. But did you know he made a drum and bass album? Oh, you need to listen to this and this, and the whole thing, right? And it kind of got me wanting to go back and revisit his discography, really. And since it is so rainy today, I've had an idea to do something that I've never done before, and that's go through his entire studio album discography in chronological order. I mean, obviously, I can't do it all today. I just mean since I can't go outside and do anything, I might as well make a start. So here's how this is going to work. Okay, I'm not Mike the Snare. This isn't a deep discog dive. What I'm going to do is I'm going to listen to an album and then just film my immediate reaction after the fact. No prep time, no big review. Not going to give you much context. Just immediately after I listen to the album, I'll just film myself, just giving my thoughts and stuff. And I'm going to do that for, I think, 28 or 29 albums I think I have to cover. So yeah, this is going to be a job that's going to have to be done over multiple weeks, maybe even months, but yeah, let's get to it. Album number 1 is considered generally to be one of his worst albums. It's the 1967 self-titled debut. Now, I've heard this album once before. I thought it was pretty much everything that everybody said that it was. I thought it was fascinating to see where he started out, and it shows a clear desire to experiment and push boundaries, but it just doesn't result in any compelling songs. It's a novelty Baroque pop album. It's very silly, it doesn't take itself very seriously, and I think that turns a lot of people off. But you know what? Knowing what to expect going in, having listened to it once already, I actually didn't mind it. I thought it was okay. It's not brilliant by any means, and I totally wouldn't recommend it to anybody who isn't already a Bowie super fan. But as is, I think it's perfectly okay. I found myself nodding along to some tracks. I actually really like the song Sell Me My Coat. I can see myself coming back to that one. Yeah, it's better than everybody says it is, I think. I didn't dislike it, which I think by default makes me this album's biggest fan. Album 2 is also self-titled. This one came out in 1969, and I think even Bowie knew that the first album was a misfire, so I think that's why the second one is also self-titled, so that maybe if he's got two albums with the same title on the shelf, maybe people would forget about the first one. But ironically, I think even though this the 1969 self-title is definitely better than the first album, I think the first album is a lot more memorable. David Bowie 1969 is a good but pretty forgettable album overall. It's a complete rebrand from Baroque pop to psychedelic folk, singer-songwriter, kind of Syd Barrett-esque, but outside of Space Oddity being Bowie's first great song. Oh, there she goes. I don't think this album has much to offer. There's definitely standout tracks. I think Signet Committee, the 10-minute sort of folk rock sprawling epic is really good while it's on. And there's a few other good ones, like the close is pretty climactic, but I just find that as soon as the album's over, it all just leaves my mind. I think it's one of Bowie's worst good albums, if that makes sense. It's probably worth a listen, but not until you've heard pretty much everything else that's good. Album number 3. The Man Who Sold the World. Yeah, you know that Nirvana song? It's actually a David Bowie song, and also it's the name of a David Bowie album. On The Man Who Sold the World, Bowie completely revamps his sound once again. This time it's a hard rock and early heavy metal album that actually came out the same year as the first Black Sabbath album, which is generally considered to be the first ever heavy metal album. I did look it up to see if Bowie actually nearly invented heavy metal, but there are 9 months between the album or so. The Black Sabbath album came out in February, and The Man Who Sold the World came out in November of 1970. And Bowie famously works very quick, so I'm sure he just heard the Black Sabbath album and said, I want to do that. But it's not a blatant rip-off, it's also pretty proggy and pretty psychedelic at moments. I think it's just as influenced by someone like Jimi Hendrix as it is Black Sabbath. Now, this is generally considered to be Bowie's first good album, which I can't fully agree with, because I do think that the second self-titled album, the last one that I talked about, was good. But I can see why people say that, because The Man Who Sold the World isn't just decent, it's really good. Now, after having listened to his first 2 albums earlier today, neither of which really got me that excited about revisiting the rest of his albums, this one reminded me why I wanted to do this. I was cooking some food while I was listening, and I had something that at one point resembled shakshuka, but then I burnt it because I was just dancing around the kitchen to this album and I forgot that I was cooking. I wouldn't go as far as to say that this album is great, but it has a lot of great moments. The opening 3-track run in particular, that goes Width of a Circle, then the absolutely euphoric All the Madmen, and what's the 3rd track? Black Country Rock. Just really brilliant stuff. And of course the title track, I mean, it speaks for itself. It took on a new life when Nirvana covered it. But whether you listen to the Bowie version or the Nirvana version, I think everybody can agree it's a brilliant song. Yeah, I'm a big fan of this one actually. It grows on me every time that I listen to it. I always find something new to appreciate about it. So it seems that Bowie has sort of found his footing. I wonder if that means on the next album that he's going to settle down in this hard rock, heavy metalish sound. Album number 4 is Hunky Dory. Now we're getting to the good stuff. In typical Bowie fashion, he's completely reinvented his sound once again on this album. He's thrown out the hard rock of The Man Who Sold the World and is now delivering piano pop bliss. This album is essential, not even to people who just want to get into David Bowie. This album is essential listening for anybody who's interested in music to any extent. It's a perfect entry-level album to the concept of music. It does a great job at kind of being definitely accessible and welcoming, but also is still very stimulating and has enough experiments to keep it interesting. It's really a one-of-a-kind album, even though I can't specifically say what this album does that other albums like it don't. It's got the sauce. It's got that thing. Hunky Dory is one of, if not the first, David Bowie album that you should hear. It's great, but I don't think it's that great. Now, just hear me out, because I know I was just saying how this album is essential and everybody needs to hear it, but that doesn't mean that I think it's perfect. The album opens with the song Changes, goes into Oh You Pretty Things, nice little extended interlude with 8-line poem, and then into Life on Mars. I think that opening 4-track run is the greatest 4-track run on any album ever, point blank period. I know that's a big statement, but I really believe that, and I have for a long time. Even though I don't know off the top of my head what my top 10 Bowie songs are, I'm absolutely confident in saying that Changes, Oh You Pretty Things, and Life on Mars are all in the top 10. The rest of the album just doesn't have anything like that for me. I know that's a nitpick. It's like, what, do I want the whole album to just be some of the best songs of all time? Not every song on here can be Life on Mars, but I do think every time I listen to this album, even though it's not, I kind of feel like the back half is really underwhelming in comparison to the first. Though I do think it's brilliant, I've never had that eureka moment with this album where I've just fallen head over heels in love with it and become obsessed with it. Obviously, we're still very early on in his discography, but I have a feeling that when I'm finished with this video and listening through all the albums in chronological order, I think this is the one I'm going to come back to first. I'm almost there with it. I can feel it. There's just a good few albums of his that I just think are a bit better. This is too dark. That'll do. So after I listened to Hunky Dory this morning, I went to visit a friend and dick around in their home studio all day, and conveniently they live just under 40 minutes away from me, which gave me almost exactly the right amount of time to listen to the next 2 Bowie albums. I just got home, so I'm going to knock them both out here. Album number 5 is The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, which came out in 1972. It's one of the most iconic albums of all time. It's the David Bowie album. If you're watching this video, I assume you at least have a passing interest in David Bowie, which means you've almost definitely heard this album. It speaks for itself, is what I'm saying. You know it's good. I know it's good. There's nothing that I can add. There's no other way that I can find to say that it's good that hasn't already been said 100 times. So now that we've both agreed that this album is good, I'm just going to be blunt with my nitpicks. There's a couple of deep cuts on here that are just kind of nothing. Soul Love, Star, they're not bad songs by any means, but when you're sandwiched between 5 years and Moon Age Daydream, it's difficult to even care about a song that's just decent. I'm definitely not trying to make the argument that this album has any bad tracks. It absolutely doesn't. But it's just a little bit inconsistent for me. I feel like such an arsehole saying anything critical about this album, because it really doesn't bother me at all that it has the status that it has, that it's acclaimed as it is. I think it's absolutely deserved. I think for the most part this album is incredible, but I mean, you already know that, and I think the only thing that I have to say about it that you haven't already heard is that there's a couple songs that I don't think are very brilliant. It's not in my personal top 3 Bowie albums. It probably just scrapes the top 5, if that. But I mean, if you haven't heard it, what are you do? Why are you even watching this video? If aliens came down to Earth tomorrow and they wanted to understand our culture, and for some reason it was my responsibility to curate a list of 10 albums to give to the aliens, to help introduce them to the concept of music, this would be one of the albums that I would give them. It has some minor issues for me that hold it back from being a perfect album, but I only really noticed those issues in the first place because I've listened to it so much over the years. I cheated a little bit last night. I was getting really excited to listen to this album, but I still hadn't listened to Hunky Dory yet, but I just couldn't resist, so I just stuck on the first track, 5 Years, which I think is my favourite track from this album. Easy top 10 Bowie song, just to sort of put me at ease so I could sleep well until today, where I could actually listen to it. I have nothing insightful to say about this album, but I mean it's brilliant. It's timeless. I think I have something a little bit more interesting to say about album 6, which is 1973's Aladdin Sane. I've only ever heard Aladdin Sane once before, and it was when I was going through Bowie's discography the first time, but not in chronological order, just sort of at my own pace and picking and choosing. After one cursory listen, I guess I just disregarded it as Ziggy Stardust again, but not quite as good. But after having just listened to it again on the drive home, I think I like it more. I know that's a terrible thing to say, and when I was younger, I used to think that people who said Aladdin Sane was better than Ziggy Stardust were just pretentious nerds and just really wanted to like the more obscure thing over the popular thing. Not that Aladdin Sane is obscure, it's still one of his most acclaimed albums, but man, it really just clicked with me this time. Aladdin Sane is a glam rock album. The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust is a glam rock album. That's 2 albums in a row, same genre. Bowie has finally settled in a sound here. But when I say settled in a sound, I don't mean he got lazy, because Aladdin Sane is so much different to Ziggy Stardust than I ever gave it credit for. Aladdin Sane features piano pretty heavily throughout a good number of its tracks and uses it in some pretty avant-garde ways. Most of the time that the piano is present on Aladdin Sane, it's not just backing the song up with chords. It's playing crazy sporadic dissonant notes, just running up and down the whole length of the piano. There's saxophones, there's harmonicas as well. I just think that on the whole, it's a lot more consistent, it's a lot more experimental, it's a lot more stylistically diverse, and for all those reasons I think it's just a bit more interesting than Ziggy or Hunky Dory. And listen, I totally acknowledge that the reason I enjoy Aladdin Sane more now, after listening to all 3 albums in one day, is because the previous 2 albums have been in my life for years, and I know them very, very well, and as much as I love them, there's not a lot about them that surprises me anymore. I think it's just really cool that I can listen to a David Bowie album that I've heard before, and it can excite me the same way that I was excited when I first heard his music. I edited down all the footage that I've got for the video so far this morning, and it's already getting really long, and we're only about a quarter of the way through the album, so I have to start being really brief about these. But luckily, album number 7 also came out in 1973, and it's Pin-Ups, which I have basically nothing to say about. It's a compilation of covers that Bowie was forced to put out because his label wanted him to capitalise on the success of Aladdin Sane, but his next album wasn't quite ready yet, so he just duffed out this sort of homage to his influences. You've got covers from like the Yardbirds and and the Pretty Things and the Who, you know, just a bunch of 60s band that he was influenced by. And the only thing notable about it is how unremarkable it is. He's got worse albums in his catalogue, much worse albums, but at least the bad ones are more interesting. This is the single most inessential release in his entire catalogue. It's a nice day, so I cycled to the beach and I'm sitting in the shade while I look out at the sea. And on the way here, I listened to album number 8, which is 1974's Diamond Dogs. Now, the songs for Diamond Dogs were written for two separate musicals that Bowie was working on that never came to be. One being a musical adaptation of George Orwell's 1984, which he couldn't secure the rights for, and the other was a musical version of The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust, which also just never came to be. So he repurposed the songs that he wrote for those and made this album, and it's good, it's solid. When I heard this when I was much younger, I think I just wrote it off as another Ziggy, but not quite as good. But even though it still is a glam rock album, I think it does have its own distinct identity from both Aladdin Sane and Ziggy Stardust. It's even more cohesive than Aladdin Sane was. A lot of the tracks transition into one another, and you can't really tell where one track starts and one track ends, and it's just got a really nice flow overall. I've always liked the title track, Diamond Dogs, and I think Sweet Thing has a really cool guitar solo at the end. This album also has Rebel Rebel, which was never one of my favourite of Bowie's big singles, but it is a decent tune. I think the most significant thing that I've gained from making this video so far is a newfound appreciation for Bowie's glam rock era, which when I was younger I considered to be one of the least interesting. Not even because I thought the music was uninteresting, but I just thought that the experimentation of later eras was just a lot more captivating to me personally. But I think now if you take pin-ups out of the picture, which you should, because pin-ups barely even counts, Ziggy Stardust, Aladdin Sane and Diamond Dogs could have made up one of the greatest album trilogies of all time. And even though I wouldn't say that this album is great, I mean, you know, very few album trilogies consist of 3 truly great albums, but I think this album is solid, and it does enough to sort of justify its own existence, and is unique enough to stand alongside the other two. There was one thing about this album that really surprised me, actually, going back to it, and that's the song 1984, which is very influenced by funk and soul and disco, and it's got these like a sort of guitars, and I don't know why it surprised me, because I know I've heard the next album, which is a funk and soul album, but for some reason in this track list it just sort of comes out of nowhere in a way that's really good and cool and satisfying, and it's a nice sort of left turn. To be honest, I think that's my favourite song from this album. So I'm going to cycle home now, and I'm going to listen to the next album, and yeah, let's see how well he pulls off that funk and soul sound for a full-length LP. Just finished listening to album number 9, Young Americans, 1976. After 4 glam rock records in a row, Bowie's back with full-length album genre experiments, and this time it's funk, soul and R&B, and it's good. I enjoy this one, even if a lot of the enjoyment I get out of it comes out of the novelty of just Bowie operating in a genre that he really has no business even trying his hand at. It's not one of the best or most successful full album genre experiments in his catalogue by any means, but you'll have fun with it if you are curious. I was picking up a bit of a Curtis Mayfield influence this time around, but I think that's more so to do with the production than the songwriting, but I mean, there's that. I think the songs meander a bit. I think pretty much every song is anywhere between 30 seconds and 2 minutes too long. It could definitely be a bit more concise, but I mean, as is, you know, it's decent, and I always have fun with this album on the rare occasion that I do stick it on. I do think, though, that if you're not really keen on this sound, on this genre, you really don't have to hear this one. You can just pick out the highlights, which are Young Americans, the opener, the title track, which is one of Bowie's best pop songs ever, and also the closer, Fame, which is a really good funk song. And also, I think if you're a Beatles fan, there's an interesting cover on here of Across the Universe, which John Lennon actually plays on, which is interesting. But yeah, apart from that, this one's kind of inessential. I just got out of the shower and now I'm having to lie down because it's been a long day of being unemployed and listening to David Bowie. But I'm not quite done yet because just before I got in the shower, I got done listening to album number 10, 1976's Station to Station, and it's fucking awesome. I'm not going to beat around the bush with this one. Station to Station is the best album so far. Bowie was at a point in his career where he'd already proven himself to the masses with his glam rock albums, and with the success of Young Americans, it kind of just proved that he could do anything and people would buy it. So he started getting weird, and pretty much everything from now until the end of the 70s is just really cool, strange, groovy, experimental music. Station to Station is David Bowie's first full-on swing at art rock, and I know that genre tag usually refers to music that's pretty self-serious, but that is not this album. This album is fun. It's so fun, and it's incredibly groovy. It's as much of a funk rock album as it is an art rock album. It's around 40 minutes, 6 tracks, no fat, not a second wasted. The opening title track is the longest song that Bowie ever made, and at about 10 minutes long, it earns every single second of his runtime. It's a killer opener, and it's honestly one of my favourite long songs ever. I can just listen to it over and over and over again. Golden Years is a better funk song than any of the songs on his Funk and Soul album. Word on a Wing is my personal favourite song from the album, and it's one of my favourite David Bowie songs of all time. It features one of his greatest vocal performances. It's so fun to sing along to. It's a brilliant ballad. TBC 15 and Stay are two more great, funky, groovy numbers, and then the album finishes with a cover of Wild is the Wind. A bit of a mellow note to end on, but it doesn't feel jarring at all. It's just beautiful and honestly kind of haunting. It's something that you wouldn't think Bowie would be able to pull off, but it's brilliant. This album is so fucking good, man. And it's not even that deep. It's just 6 killer tracks, just wrapped up in a nice little bow. Even the album cover's fucking awesome. I love this thing, man. And the craziest thing about the whole thing is that Bowie was so hopelessly addicted to cocaine while he was making it that he said on multiple occasions that he did not remember anything about making the album, and it's one of the best in his entire catalogue. This morning I listened to album number 11, 1997's Low, which was recorded in Berlin. At this point Bowie had moved to Berlin with Iggy Pop in an attempt to kick his drug habit, and that's where the next 3 albums were recorded. This is the first album in his Berlin trilogy. He also teamed up with ambient music pioneer Brian Eno, who I just want to say now I think is equally as responsible for the genius of this album as Bowie is. The first side is made up of these sketch-like art rock pieces that despite how sort of strange and off-center they are, they're also very hooky and very catchy. The second side of the album is all ambient music, and there's not really much of a transition. It's kind of literally just art rock songs, one instrumental to kind of bridge the gap a bit, and then just 4 behemoth ambient tracks. I say behemoth because not because of they're super long or anything. They're only about between 4 and 6 minutes each. The weight they carry on this album is absolutely immense. There's this just palpable feeling of dread that you get just from the music. As brilliant as it is, I haven't returned to this album a lot. By no means is it the most experimental music you'll ever hear, but it is a pretty demanding listen. And not in the sense that you have to force yourself to pay attention. The album does a great job of commanding that from the listener. You kind of can't help but just sit down with it and just listen intently. That's really how you're going to get the most out of this album, if you really just sort of like lay down in a dark room and just like let it consume you. I think now more than ever I'm starting to understand the brilliance of Low. And I think it is just a thing that's come with age. But I think Low is just a very substantive album, and it's very mature, and I just don't think that when I was younger I was really equipped to deal with this album. When they were making it, I just don't understand how Eno and Bowie ever even came to the conclusion that this album that plays out like a series of sketches, just unfinished ideas, and then with the complete, honestly jarring genre shift, like right in the middle, that it was ever fit to release. But I mean, thank God they did, because it somehow, miraculously, it just fucking works. I've been all over the place today, been running around doing bits and bobs, so I haven't had time to film my immediate reactions, but I did get through 4 albums, so I'm just gonna bang them all out right now. Album number 12, Heroes, 1977, the second entry in the Berlin trilogy. This is my fucking shit. I love Heroes. Heroes is brilliant. I think I've listened to it. I've definitely listened to it in full more than any other David Bowie album. It was my favourite Bowie album for a long time. And I only say was because I want to wait until I'm finished re-listening to all the albums to, I suppose, really decide which one is my favourite. But I also think I've had my day with this album. I don't think there's anything more I can get from it at this point because I've listened to it so much. Heroes plays out almost identically to Low, with the first side being comprised of art rock tracks and then the second side being comprised of mostly ambient tracks. But where it differs from Low is the general tone. It doesn't quite have the same suffocating atmosphere that Low does, and that same looming dread. Lyrically, Bowie is still writing about these observations that he's making and general feelings that are coming up while he's being cooped up in this studio that's only 150 feet away from the Berlin Wall. In many ways, the lyrics on Heroes are more direct and more bleak than they are on Low. You needn't look further than the opening track, Beauty and the Beast, which features the lyrics, "There's slaughter in the air, there's protest on the wind, someone else inside me, someone could get skinned." But then the sort of, I suppose, paranoid lyrics are set to one of the most danceable songs in Bowie's discography. And I think that's one of the biggest differences between Low and Heroes is I think Heroes is a lot more accessible. I think it's a lot more digestible. The songs generally sound less sketch-like. They're more complete. That isn't a criticism against Low. That's just kind of observational. I don't think Heroes is one of the most well put together albums. I think Low is more satisfying from top to bottom. I'm also kind of just see Heroes as a compilation of stellar tracks. I think maybe it's just a little bit disjointed, at least in comparison to Low. But it's never really bothered me because this album is just stuffed full of some of the best deep cuts in Bowie's discography. You got Beauty and the Beast, Joe the Lion, Sons of the Silent Age. Even The Secret Life of Arabia, I think, is a great tune. And the ambient pieces are great as well. I think Moss Garden is absolutely beautiful. This album does have one song that's kind of like a vortex, and it seems to kind of suck everything in around it. And that's Heroes. Heroes is David Bowie's most popular song, or like one of his most popular songs. And it's one of those rare occasions where I think the artist's most popular song is actually their best song. I think Heroes is David Bowie's best song in his entire catalogue. And not just that, I think Heroes is one of the best songs of all time. Point blank, period. Like top 10 songs of all time. And it's just weird having it a track 3 because it sticks out like a sore thumb because of how good it is. It's a nitpick, right? Because I don't think you could put it really anywhere else in the album apart from maybe like close with it. And have it like change it that much. I still think it's gonna stick out like a sore thumb because it is just that good. I don't know. I could waffle about Heroes for hours, so I'm just gonna cut myself off there. Album number 13 is the final installment in the Berlin trilogy and is 1979's Lodger. This album doesn't really have anything to do with the other two, apart from the fact that, you know, it was made in Berlin. But I mean, it doesn't follow the same kind of structure of, you know, one side art rock, other side ambient music. This is a whole different thing altogether. Bowie's just having a whale of a time on this one, and in a way, I think it's his most experimental album up until this point. But I also don't think it's as demanding of a listen as Low or Heroes. I wouldn't say this album is accessible, but if you're used to experimental music, this album's good fun. It's pretty easy listening, at least compared to the other two albums in this trilogy. It's got some weird funk stuff. It's got some pretty crazy world music stuff. It's just real like, you know, Bowie's just throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. And some of it sticks, some of it doesn't. But overall, it's at the very least, it's an interesting listen. Fantastic Voyage stands tall above the rest for me. It's easily the best track here. But there's also some other pretty compelling ones like African Night Dream, which is definitely the most experimental song Bowie made or released on an album up to this point, and still it's probably one of the strangest songs in his whole discography. DJ's a cool funk number. Look Back in Anger is got a pretty catchy hook. It's quite an earworm. Lodger is similar to Diamond Dogs for me. That is, if you consider Diamond Dogs to be the third part of a trilogy, as I do, and you know, you discount pinups. But I mean, that's the first similarity, is that they're both the final entry in their respective trilogies. The first two albums in both trilogies are more similar to each other than the third entry. But the third entry has enough unique ideas and is kind of doing its own thing in an interesting enough way to stand alongside the other two, even if it's clearly not as good. Album number 14 is Scary Monsters and Super Creeps from 1980. This is a new wave and post-punky album. This is a very transitional album for Bowie, considering what's coming next. It's sort of him getting back into playing with popular styles of music at the time. Obviously, we're in the 80s now, so you know, we're getting new wave and post-punk. And it's Bowie getting back into the swing of things in the mainstream, because obviously for the end from like 76 to 79, he was just, you know, doing all these strange art rock albums. And I think it's really good, and I think it's really cool that, you know, Bowie can go away and do all this experimental music and then, you know, just return to the mainstream like he never left. This album has Ashes to Ashes, which is obviously a brilliant single, and even though it's not one of Bowie's like most popular songs, it is definitely one of the most beloved. Fashion's a great track. Like I already mentioned, the title track is fantastic. This album, for me though, has its own heroes, in the sense that there's one track that kind of like sort of in the middle of the album-ish, just sucks everything else in around it. That song is Teenage Wildlife, and Teenage Wildlife is for me a very close second for best Bowie song. I think it captures a kind of similar melancholy to Heroes in a way that I think only these two songs do. Not even any other songs in the Bowie catalogue, let alone any other songs like in general. Like there's just these two songs that capture this very specific, like, bittersweet melancholy, and it really hits me, man. But unfortunately, I don't think the rest of this album is quite as good as the rest of Heroes is, so it doesn't kind of just, you know, brush the dirt off his shoulder and, you know, keep plodding along. It kind of does make the whole rest of it feel a little bit underwhelming. But again, that's a nitpick. I mean, like, oh, what, this album has a song that's too good, oh no. Great album. I like this one a lot. And the last album that I listened to when I was out and about today was album number, oh god, where are we? 15? Album number 15, 1983's Let's Dance. Let's Dance is a full-on pop album produced by Nile Rodgers of Chic. And it's fine. It's a vehicle for the singles, like a lot of pop albums are. Let's Dance, the song is, you know, undeniable, one of the most iconic pop songs of the 80s, and probably Bowie's best pop song. Modern Love is great too. China Girl's decent, and I'm also quite fond of that track on the back end, Cat People setting something on fire. I can't remember exactly what it's called. That's a good tune too. But This album is 40 minutes and only 8 tracks long. So, you know, each track is clocking in at about 4 or 5, 6 minutes, and it can get pretty tiresome when half of these tracks are pretty nothing. I think I'd have a lot more goodwill toward this album if it was just a one-off, right? If Bowie, you know, he tried this pop thing and it didn't really work out, and, you know, whatever, we're on to something new on the next album. But unfortunately, this wasn't a one-off. Let's Dance was Bowie's most commercially successful album, and so for a brief moment in time, Bowie lost his artistic integrity to chasing commercial success. The next 2 albums, and that is going to round out the 80s, by the way, much less prolific decade than the 70s. This is 1983, and we've only got 2 more albums in the 80s. They're both pop albums. They are both worst attempts at pop music. I am not looking forward to tomorrow. Album number 16 is 1984's Tonight. Is a blatant attempt to capitalise on the success of Let's Dance, and it's fine. This is a pineapple, if you don't know. And I just finished listening to the album, and I came downstairs, walked into the kitchen, and I saw this pineapple sitting on the table over here. And I looked at it for about 10 seconds before I was suddenly hit with the realization that I was more mentally stimulated in the 10 seconds that I was looking at this pineapple than I was by any of the 9 tracks on Tonight. I was kind of dreading coming back to this album. I think I remembered it being a lot worse than it actually is, but it's just like whatever. It's got this like reggae thing going on sometimes, which I guess is the only really interesting thing about it. I guess those are the most interesting tracks, but everything else here is just generic pop rock crap. This is pretty unanimously considered to be one of Bowie's worst albums. And like, yeah, I guess it is. But honestly, I don't even have it in me to hate this thing. I'm not going to defend it. There's nothing on here worth defending. But it's just like, there's absolutely nothing on here that stirs up any sort of emotion in me, positive or negative. I feel like your nan would get a kick out of this album. Your nan, specifically, not my nan. My nan's cool. People go on about the opening track, Loving the Alien, and say like it's so much better than the rest of the album. And like, I think it's a decent track, but like, who really gives a shit? At least it's kind of short. This album's only 35 minutes long. It could be worse. Let's just get this next one out of the way. Just been setting up to record today, and just finished listening to album number 17, 1987's Never Let Me Down. Now, this is the one that I was dreading, because Never Let Me Down is pretty universally considered to be Bowie's absolute worst album. And I had no idea what to expect going into it, because this is the first album that I've talked about so far that I actually haven't heard before. And you know what? I'm kind of shocked that I don't hate it. Don't get me wrong, it's not good, but I also wouldn't say it's really bad. It's at least more interesting than Tonight. That album was just mind-numbingly boring. At least with Never Let Me Down, you know, you've got lower lows, but also higher highs. Either way, but both end up being more memorable than basically all of the material on Tonight. The main reason I think people don't get on with this album is the production, which, to put it as nice as possible, is definitely of the time. You could definitely turn that snare down at least 50% and it would probably still be too loud. You wouldn't mix a record like this today, but I also don't really have a huge problem with going back to these kind of 80s pop rock albums and having this big, bombastic, kind of obnoxious production. Like I said, it's just of the time, and to be honest, it really doesn't bother me that much. Again, it's at least got more life than Tonight did. Based on the first leg of the album, I actually thought I was going to be in for something quite enjoyable. I found myself nodding along to the first 2 tracks. What was it? It's called like Day In, Day Out, I think, and then the other one is Time Will Crawl. That one in particular is probably the best song on the album. Then there's like some other track that I didn't care about, and then you get the title track, track 4, which I also thought was kind of decent. I just struggled to hate this album, to be honest, because at least it elicits much more of an emotional reaction in me than Tonight did. And I know I keep comparing it to that album, but I think it's important because that album catches way less flack than this one does. But realistically, they're about the same. I feel like I'm defending it a little bit. I don't like this album, but I don't hate it either. Remember when I said that Bowie only put out 2 more albums in the 80s after Let's Dance? Well, I lied, because I didn't realise that the first Tin Machine album actually came out in 1989. Tin Machine is a band that Bowie put together toward the end of the 80s in an attempt to try and find some new artistic direction and, you know, get his mojo back a bit. At least I think, anyway. I don't really know anything about Tin Machine. It's always been a blind spot for me in my Bowie listening. I hadn't heard either of the Tin Machine albums before earlier today when I listened to them both in succession. The Tin Machine albums don't technically count as a part of Bowie's core discography, but most people chuck them in there just for fun anyway, and I'm going to do the same because I've never heard them. I'm going to cover them both now because I don't really have anything to say about them individually. As I said, there's 2. Tin Machine 1, which came out in 1989, and Tin Machine 2, which came out in 1991. Now, imagine rock music. That's what Tin Machine sounds like. You're spot on. Yeah, Tin Machine, both of the albums are pretty generic. There's really nothing to say about them. It's just, you know, it's a change from the pop music that Bowie's been making all throughout the 80s, you know, change into hard rock, but it's all pretty generic stuff. There's a few good tunes on both of them, but I can't really remember the names of any of the tunes I liked. I really like the opening track on the second one. I like the second album overall a fair bit more than I did the first one. Bowie just seems a bit more there, like he's enjoying himself a bit more. But either way, these are both decent albums, but like completely inessential. Are you recording?
I am.
Okay, my girlfriend's behind the camera. We're on our way back from the beach, and we just finished listening to 1993's Black Tie, White Noise, which is I think we're on album number 20 now. Nile Rodgers back on the board from Let's Dance, but this time the results are a lot better. I think this is the most underrated David Bowie album in his entire discography. I did not expect to like this as much as I did the second time around. I don't even really know how to like describe the sound of this album. It's kind of like jazz pop, but there's also some funk in there, obviously from Nile Rodgers on production. I don't really know what this album is, but it's fucking awesome. I think this is the best album since, I don't know, Scary Monsters and Super Creeps in 1980. This might be the best album since Heroes. Yeah, I fucking love this album. It's just got like great like deep grooves all over the record. Horns on like every track that just sound awesome. I kind of wrap my head around why this album is generally sort of, it has like mixed reception, because I think it's fucking brilliant. I don't know, what did you think of it?
So jazzy. Want to go to a jazz club now. So fun. Loved it. 10 out of 10.
Awesome. Album number 21 is The Buddha of Suburbia, which also came out in 1993, the same year as Black Tie, White Noise, which may explain why some of these songs kind of sound like leftovers from that album. There doesn't really seem to be a consensus on whether or not The Buddha of Suburbia counts as a part of Bowie's main solo studio album discography, because it is a soundtrack to a TV show of the same name. But the reason I think it counts, and what sets it apart from other Bowie soundtracks like the Labyrinth soundtrack, for example, that soundtrack is only like 50% Bowie songs. The other half of that soundtrack is just film score composed by someone else. The reason this counts for me is that it's all original Bowie compositions. So, you know, with 56 minutes of original Bowie material, I don't see any reason why this shouldn't be considered alongside all the other albums. I guess it doesn't really matter though, because if you are planning to go through the Bowie discography for yourself, I'm just going to tell you to skip this one. I don't think it's as completely pointless as I once thought it was. The first and only time that I ever listened to it, I did conclude that it was the single most inessential release in Bowie's catalogue, which, I mean, there's an argument to be made for it, but I still think there's more to enjoy here than Pin-Ups and maybe even the Tin Machine albums. I thought the opening title track was pretty decent. Getting some pretty heavy Black Tie, White Noise vibes off that one, but I mean, for me, that's a good thing. I actually think that all the proper songs on here are quite decent. It's just the ambient instrumentals that really bring the whole thing down and are just completely forgettable. A far cry from the stuff that appeared on Low and Heroes, which is why I think that Brian Eno is largely responsible for those tracks being as good as they are, because it just proves here that when Bowie's trying to do that stuff on his own, it's just nothing. The main reason that I would argue for this album, at least counting as a part of Bowie's main discography, is simply for the one song right in the middle of the album, Dead Against It. I don't know why, I've never heard anybody even talk about this song, but I've loved it since I first heard it. It doesn't sound like anything else on this album, anything else in his discography really, apart from maybe some stuff on the next album. But yeah, I've also gone on to attach some really lovely memories to this song. I think it's amazing. You can skip this album. I doubt I'll ever listen to it ever again, but listen to Dead Against It. Right, I need my hands for this one. Album number 22 is 1995's One, as in the number one, Outside, open bracket, the Nathan Adler Diaries, colon, a hypercycle, close bracket. I don't even know where to start with this one. Brian Eno's back, the first album they've done together since the Berlin trilogy. This album is something of a concept album, but the concept isn't really in the album. Right, basically, the story behind this album was Brian Eno and Bowie came up with this concept of a dystopian future where people murder other people as art, and this Nathan Adler character is a detective who's gone to investigate the murder of a 14-year-old girl who's been murdered as a part of this, like, you know, murder art movement scene. You won't know that by just listening to the album, so I guess it failed as a concept album, but you do need to know it because there's all these like spoken word interludes and stuff across the whole album, and if you don't know that context, you won't have a fucking clue what's going on. I don't have a fucking clue what's going on, and I know this, and I've listened to this album twice, but it's good. It's actually good, I promise. As you can tell from that plot rundown, this is an ambitious album. This is Bowie's most ambitious album, clocking in at 1 hour and 14 minutes. This is by far the longest album he ever made. In terms of what the albums sound like, yes, this is an art rock album, and yes, there is ambient bits, but you'd be a fool to go into this thinking that it's going to sound anything like the stuff that Bowie and Eno did on the Berlin albums. In the mid-90s, Bowie got very chummy with Trent Reznor and was a huge fan of Nine Inch Nails. So this is his take on that sound. This is an industrial rock album. And it's insane. I mean, the first time I listened to it, I didn't know what to make of it, because I didn't have the context that I do now. I didn't know that it was a concept album, and I didn't really give it all that much attention. I was listening out of one ear, and I was just like, "What the fuck is this?" But this time I sat down with it, and I knew what it was going in, and I gave it my full attention, and it's pretty good. It's really good, actually. Well, I don't know. There's a really good. There's a great album in here somewhere, but there's a lot of fluff. The production is excellent. I mean, you expect that from Eno, and that's really one of this album's strongest points. Lyrically, Bowie gets really bogged down by trying to convey this concept of trying to tell this story, but it you know, that falls flat on its face. There's some like filler stuff here, stuff that's trying to, like, you know, sort of build out the world of the album. But this album is kind of at its best when it's not really all too concerned with the overall plot, and it's just is what it is, and it's just delivering the songs. For the most part, they're really good. Hello Space Boy, We Prick You, Strangers When We Meet, the song that was on Buddha of Suburbia, closes this album, and it feels much more at home here. This album is an underrated gem, and this album is a perfect example of why people love 90s Bowie. You know, a lot of people have come around over the years on a lot of his 90s output, even though at the time pretty much all of it was mixed reviews, and some of it was pretty panned. But he's at this point in his very interesting point in his career in the 90s where he's already lost the favour of the critics. The general public has counted him out. He's kind of got no one to impress with his new material, even though, you know, he's still successful and people are going to see him live and stuff. So he's just doing whatever the fuck, and you just get crazy, insane albums like this that even from someone as creative and who's historically proven to be such a musical chameleon, you'd never expect him to do something like this. I'm a fan. It's got flaws, it's bloated, but overall, this is a good album. Album number 23 is Bowie's drum and bass album. It's Earthling from 1997. Even though most people refer to it as such, it's a little bit dishonest to call this just a drum and bass album, because it's equally as much of an industrial rock album. This was my favourite 90s Bowie album at a point, and it's the only one that I had heard more than once prior to making this video. But after this re-listen, it's just not really clicking with me. The highlights are stellar. I mean, Little Wonder and I'm Afraid of Americans are two of the best songs that Bowie had put out at this point in over like 15 years. But then some of the other stuff on here is just really not great. Yeah, this one's a mixed bag. I mean, when it's good, but when it's not, it can be really obnoxious. Album number 24 is 1999's Hours. I think this is what people who don't like Black Tie, White Noise hear when they listen to that album, because this is nothing. This is so nothing that it makes Tonight look like something. It makes Pin-Ups look like a good album. I cannot fathom why, after this, you know, crazy creative streak that Bowie had in the 90s, just right at the end of the decade, he decided to just like fucking phone it in with the most boring, pointless album in his discography. It's frankly embarrassing. Do not listen to this album. Never listen to this album under any circumstances. You will gain nothing from it. Thankfully, Hours is just a blip, because album number 25, 2002's Heathen, is rock solid. It kicks off great with opener Sunday, which is a great like slow burn track that builds to this big climactic ending that's really satisfying. It then goes into a cover of Cactus by Pixies. It's a really good cover. It ends strong with Everybody Says Hi and Better Future. It gets a bit like samey in the middle of the album, but overall Heathen is a rock solid alternative rock album. Just a very like back to basics affair for Bowie, but it is a good listen. I'm really just duffing them out today. I just finished listening to album number 26, which is 2003's Reality. Now this is the last of the 4 albums that I hadn't heard going into this video. And yeah, I didn't need to hear this one. It's fine. It's decent actually. It's not I wouldn't say it's mediocre, even though it's not far from it. It's pretty decently enjoyable to start off with, and then the back half of the album is like whatever. I just finished listening to it and I don't really remember anything about it. I can't really cite any particular songs. There's a cover of Rebel, or I say cover, a re-recording of Rebel that closes the album, which is like, why? I don't know. It's whatever. It's inessential. I assumed, I suppose, just by looking at the album cover, I assumed that this would be a much more upbeat album than it is, but it follows in the footsteps of Heathen, so it's pretty moody for a good chunk of it. Yeah, it's fine. It's decent. This probably takes the place of when I said, like, right at the start of the video that the second self-titled Bowie album is the the worst good one. I think this is probably his worst good album. There's more to enjoy, even on like the Tin Machine albums, I think. But I mean, yeah, it's fine. There's a big time jump between Reality and the album that I listened to this morning, The Next Day, from 2013. That's a time jump of 10 years. The longest gap between any Bowie album. And the reason for that is because on the Reality tour in 2003, I believe, Bowie suffered a heart attack and withdrew from the public eye. So The Next Day is a comeback album. I'm sure for many years most people thought that Reality was the last album that Bowie would ever put out. And it's wonderful that Bowie decided at some point that it was time for him to return, because I think Reality would be a bit of a bum note to go out on. But to be honest, I don't think The Next Day is that much better. Apart from loving Black Tie, White Noise, I think this is probably going to be my most controversial opinion in this whole video. I don't really care for The Next Day. And the reason that that's controversial is because I gather that The Next Day is the most critically acclaimed and also just generally well regarded Bowie album post Let's Dance, apart from the next one that we'll talk about in a minute. But I don't know, it doesn't really do all that much for me. I don't think it's a bad album or even a mediocre album. I think it's decent, and I understand the appeal. Despite being a decade removed from these two albums, I kind of see The Next Day as a part of a trilogy with Heathen and Reality, what I think of as Bowie's Back to Basics trilogy. I think that was the biggest surprise for me coming back to The Next Day after now having heard Reality, is how similar the last few albums are, because I expected something a lot more poppy out of that album. I never really made the connection in my mind between Heathen and The Next Day, but all three of these albums are very similar. The Next Day is a lot more moody, it's a lot darker, it's a bit heavier. There's more distortion, the songs have a bit more urgency. Bowie sounds hungrier, but I don't know, just something about it just doesn't really capture me. It holds my attention, and I don't mind it while it's on. I do think it's a decent album overall, but there's nothing that I'm really all too compelled to come back to. I like The Next Day. I wish I liked it more, but I think I just got my fill with Heathen. The Next Day being this kind of the third album in a row of Bowie taking it back to basics a bit. It's just not too interesting to me. In 2016, Bowie released his 28th studio album, Blackstar, which would be his final album, as 2 days after Blackstar was released, Bowie passed away. Now, that's common knowledge amongst Bowie fans, but if you were unaware, it's essential to understanding why this album is so great. I think it was 2 years before this album was released, Bowie was diagnosed with, I believe, pancreatic cancer, and this album sees him directly confront his own mortality. But despite the subject matter, I don't think this is a depressing album, far from it. I actually think it's kind of uplifting in a way. It's an experimental jazz rock album, but really there's no genre tags that you can throw on this thing that will accurately describe how it sounds. You have to hear it for yourself. Just standing here trying to think of ways to describe how this album sounds, I'm kind of drawing a blank. I'm just lost for words a bit. But I think just the title Blackstar is brilliant in of itself, and it tells you everything you need to know about the album before you've even heard a second of it. It's dark and it's moody and it's sort of shrouded in mystery, but at the same time it's ethereal, it's otherworldly, it's awe-inspiring. I think I'll just reuse and reword something that I said about Station to Station, in that this album has 7 tracks, it's about 40 minutes long, and it does not waste a single second. I don't think anybody is ever going to be able to leave a more definitive, complete statement than Bowie did. Death isn't an uncommon topic in music, but it's almost always from the lens of somebody who is witnessing somebody else deteriorate, fade away, or somebody who's trying to grapple with the feelings of the sudden disappearance of someone who you would never expect to disappear so soon. I think there's very few examples of death being confronted through music by somebody who is dying. It's just not a perspective that we get often. Blackstar is not a self-pitying album fueled by regret and despair. It is a triumphant march toward death, and a beautiful and frightening and honest account from a man who is staring into the abyss. It's a fucking masterpiece. So I said that Blackstar was album number 28 and that it was Bowie's final album. And while that is technically true, you may recall at the beginning of the video I said there were 29 albums to cover. There is one more album. I'm so sorry. I will try to be brief. So in the year 2000, Bowie decided to re-record some songs that he had written and recorded during the 60s that never made it onto any albums. Those songs were a part of an album called Toy that was finished and was ready to be released, but due to a falling out with his label at the time, Toy was shelved and never came out. I think it was leaked on the internet or something. People were aware of its existence and heard bits and pieces of it, or something like that. In 2021, we got the album posthumously. It's... I gotta be totally honest, I could not finish this album. I have heard Toy before. I heard it when it came out. I thought nothing of it. I think at this point I'm just so... I have no patience for uncreative Bowie albums after having listened to Pin-Ups, Hours, Tonight, in such a short period of time. I cannot stomach another boring Bowie album. And I mean, I got like 2/3 of the way through. I had like 4 tracks left. I knew there was going to be nothing of worth in those 4 tracks. I called it a day. I'm sorry. I fell at the last hurdle. I couldn't do it. I don't know if I'd say that it's his worst album, because unlike those other albums that I just mentioned, there is stuff I like on here. I don't mind the opening track, and I actually do quite like the lead single for this album, You've Got a Habit of Leaving Me. But apart from that, it's just boring. There's nothing to it. The only notable thing about this album is the weird freaky baby on the cover that's had Bowie's like face awkwardly photoshopped onto it. Most people seem to hate it. I think it's actually quite a cool album cover, but it doesn't fit the album at all. This didn't need to see the light of day. That is it. I'm done. 29 albums in just over a week, I think. This didn't take anywhere near as long as I thought it would. But I'm glad I did it. This was really good fun. I thought I'd come back to where I started the video to finish it, because I don't know, it makes it full circle, I guess. When I started the video here, like over a week ago, I did it because it was a rainy day and I just didn't have anything else to do. But now it's lovely out there. But as you can probably tell, I'm ill, so I don't really have the energy to go out and make the most of the sun, which is just my luck, really. But instead, I'm gonna find a way to finish this video today. And I thought, since all the albums are fresh in my mind, I'll just do a ranking. That seems like an appropriate way to do, if maybe a bit uncreative, but an appropriate way to end this. I got my laptop here where I got my ranking written down, so let's just do it. Number 29, right at the bottom of the list, is Hours. It deserves to be there. It fucking sucks. Number 28 is Toy. Now, you might be wondering why Toy is above Hours if I couldn't finish it. Toy is supremely boring, but it doesn't piss me off like Hours does. Number 27 is Tonight. Number 26 is the album that I probably would have put at the bottom of this list before having re-listened to all the albums, Pin-Ups. Number 25 is Never Let Me Down. Shockingly, there are 4 whole albums that I find to be more tedious than it. Number 23 is Tin Machine. Number 22 is Tin Machine 2. Number 21 is David Bowie, 1967. I'm not saying I like it, but I really don't mind it. It does not deserve to be right down the bottom with the likes of Hours and Tonight. Put some respect on the debut's name. Number 20 is the Buddha of Suburbia. Number 19 is The Next Day. I know, I'm sorry. Number 18 is David Bowie, 1969. Number 17 is Let's Dance. Number 16 is Earthling, which hurts to put it that low, but it just didn't really hold up on this re-listen. Number 15 is Young Americans. Number 14 is Heathen. 13, The Man Who Sold the World. 12, Lodger. 11, Diamond Dogs, which I am shocked to put so high. I'm not even that enthusiastic about Diamond Dogs, but it really is just that solid. Just scraping the top 10 is One Outside, which I will admit is an album that's a lot more obviously flawed than some of the far more, I suppose, overall solid albums that come just below it, like Diamond Dogs and Lodger, but I find that it takes a lot more risks, and for that reason it's a lot more interesting. It's a lot easier to get excited about. Number 9, Black Tie, White Noise. I love it, I don't care what you think. Number 8 is Scary Monsters and Super Creeps. Number 7 is The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, which I must say I am also surprised that it didn't crack the top 5 at least. And just looking at this now, I'm just realizing that Ziggy Stardust and Black Tie, White Noise are only separated by one album. And yeah, I'll admit that that's outrageous, but I must make it clear that I think there's a pretty huge gap between the top 7 and the rest of the list. I think there's a huge gap between Ziggy and Scary Monsters, and then I think there's also another big gap between Scary Monsters and Black Tie. I think Black Tie, White Noise is more on the level of quality of Diamond Dogs and Lodger and One Outside than it is anywhere near the quality of Ziggy Stardust. Now that I've got that out the way, number 6 is Hunky Dory. Number 5 is Aladdin Sane. Number 4 hurts. Number 4 is Heroes. I love Heroes. I really, really do. It was my favourite Bowie album for a long, long time. I just find that these days there's something a little bit more interesting to me about number 3, Low. Here we are at the top 2 albums, and I literally just swapped them around. I was looking at it and I was umming and ahhing, and I made a call. But I think that speaks to how good both of these albums are. I think they will probably continue to flip-flop for me, but today, this is how I'm feeling. Number 2 is Blackstar, and number 1 is Station to Station. Thank you for making it all the way here. I know this video was too long, and I apologise for that. But I don't usually do this. I've never done this in a video before. But I suppose if you've made it here, I guess that kind of means that maybe you have some interest in me, or what I have to say, or maybe what I do. So maybe like and subscribe. I don't know, that feels gross. But I mean, I don't usually do this kind of stuff. I upload my original songs. I'm a musician, I'm a recording artist, and I kind of I do weekly uploads, and I upload a song, original song one week, and then the next week I'll do a video like this, so I'm just talking about something that I want to talk about. So maybe stick around, but even if you don't, thank you for watching this video. See you next week. I'm Shibbler. Bye.